Good morning. I'm Saini at the University of Canberra. I'm speaking with Michelle Grattan about politics in Australia. Good morning, Michelle.
Hi, Deep.
Michelle, let's start with the story of Angus Taylor, who in his maiden speech spoke about his days in Oxford, where he has brought up the name of Naomi Wolf, who is, as you know, a famous feminist writer. And that was in the context of some students trying to prevent a Christmas tree from going up. Now, Naomi Wolf has completely denied that that ever happened, and she said she wasn't even at Oxford at that point, and has demanded an apology. And Angus Taylor is refusing to come up with any such apology. I would like to hear your comments on that very complicated saga.
Well, at one level, it's a ridiculous saga for a cabinet minister to be involved in at this stage, but it just adds to Angus Taylor's general problems. He always seems to be getting stuck on flypaper of his own creation. He does seem to have mixed up the facts here that Naomi Wolf wasn't a neighbouring student in the same corridor as he asserted. Now, he said that he didn't say that she was actually one of those warring on Christmas, but that was the implication from bringing up her name and what he went on to say in his maiden speech. It's just another Angus Taylor tangle, which adds to the general trouble that he's in.
And life keeps getting difficult.
Well, indeed, and he doesn't sort of clean up this mess when he gets into it. We just see this again and again. He doubles down, he says, no, that's not what I meant, or whatever, whereas somebody else would just find a way of moving on.
Moving to another difficult thing for the government, where they actually end up having a win, and that is the repeal of the Medevac Act, and they managed to do that with the help of Jackie Lambie and passed it through Senate. Now that bill has passed, but there are implications of it. First, please walk us through the implications of that passage.
This was something that the government was very determined to secure. The medevac legislation was passed during that brief period of minority government before the election, and Scott Morrison really wanted to reverse that situation. So a lot of effort has been put during the week into getting Jackie Lambie's vote, and that was secured and the repeal went through. It was even more important because, of course, last week the government suffered that defeat in the Senate over the union legislation when Pauline Hanson voted in a way the government didn't expect. The implications of this repeal, well, it will make it harder, I think, for refugees to be transferred for medical reasons to Australia from offshore. I think the minister, when he has again the sole say, essentially will be tougher than he was. One thing we don't know is what was agreed between the government and Jackie Lambie on the terms on which she would vote. And there's a lot of speculation about that.
So I want to talk a bit about that as well, because that's significant. So she made a deal that nobody knows, but everybody knows that she made a deal.
Well, the government denies that they made a deal. They said they just reasserted that they would carry out government policy. But I think, as you say, everyone believes there's some arrangement.
That's right. So she made that arrangement that everybody believes. Where does that leave her within her own constituency, where, you know, people who voted for her? Where does she stand with those people now?
I think personally it's pretty reprehensible not to explain yourself, not to say what the background is. Now, the speculation is that the government has said that after the American deal, resettlement deal, is completed, it will look at the New Zealand option. New Zealand has offered to take refugees, but we don't know that. We think that, but don't know it. Now, Jackie Lambie has stood behind the wall of national security, saying she can't explain her discussions with the government in depth. I don't think that is adequate. I can't think of any reasons that national security would require that secrecy. And if you have the sort of power that Jackie Lambie has in the Senate, in this case the power to make or break a piece of legislation, then I think transparency is required.
Flip side of that is the fate of refugees on Manus and Nauru Islands. You've alluded to the difficulties that they're likely to face, but overall in the long run, where does that leave the situation of refugees stranded on those islands, and what do you think is the way forward from there?
Well, firstly, the numbers have been whittled down by transfers to Australia of people who are unwell and families, and those transfers have included the medevac ones, but also ones that the government undertook before of its own accord. So now there's fewer than 500 people in total that we're talking about. I think that some will still go to the United States, be resettled under that deal. I think that some, even though it will be a smaller flow than formerly, will continue to be transferred to Australia on medical grounds, and some will go home to their country of origin, people who have been determined not to be refugees. Some are refusing to do that, but I think that others will go home. So I think in the end, most people will be removed one way or another, but it's going to be a pretty tortuous process. And of course, I should add that if the government has given an agreement on New Zealand, then you'd expect that that will eventually become the default option.
Now, switching to the economy, and national accounts figures show slowing growth. We're talking about 1.7% now, as against 2.75% that was in the forecast. What are the reasons for this shift that we are seeing, and what does that mean for the future of our economy?
I think it's a combination of domestic factors and also international factors. People got their tax cuts, but many people were highly in debt, and they used those tax cuts fully or partially to pay down household debt rather than spending them. So consumption has been sluggish. Business investment isn't as strong as the government would hope and the economy needs. There's a good deal of economic insecurity and uncertainty about. It was felt that the election would remove some of that. Perhaps it has removed a portion, but nevertheless, I don't think that people are as confident about the future as a strong economy requires them to be. So at various levels, things are just chugging along in a pretty slow way. Having said that, the government would make the point that the Australian economy looks in much better shape than a number of comparable economies abroad.
Now, there may or may not be a connection between what we just talked and what I'm about to bring up now, and that is Scott Morrison's restructuring of the public service. So 18 departments have gone down to 14. 5 heads of the department have lost their positions. So there is, you could say that there are cuts to the public service, and it's shrinking. What was the need for that? And again, what does it imply?
I think it implies that Scott Morrison wants to make over the structure in a way he feels is particularly responsive to his approach to government. He wants to put maximum emphasis on service delivery. and he downplays the public service as a source of independent policy advice. He says that setting policies the government's job, and the public service should get on with implementing that policy in the most efficient way possible. Now, an interesting thing is that this restructuring, which creates some new mega departments while shrinking, as you said, the number of departments, is not being accompanied by a reshuffle. The government is suggesting there won't be any ministerial changes, although that can always alter if it finds circumstances alter or whatever. But at the moment we have a ministry which is stable in personnel and jobs, but a bureaucracy where you're going to have an immense amount of disruption, albeit temporary disruption. Whether that works out to be a more efficient and effective public service, well, it'll take a year or two for us to be able to judge that.
Well, thank you, Michelle, for that. And this is something that we are going to be watching for months to come. And we'll be back next week. And I'm reminding you that would be the last interview you and I do together, because the following week I'll be on a plane to Canada. And I'm looking forward to our last video interview.
See you then.
See you then, Michelle.